There are things we learn as children that stick with us all the days of our lives. I first heard Martin Luther King's famous I Have a Dream speech when I was just 13 years old. Like most Americans, I've heard it in whole or part many times since then. But beyond the emotions it stirred and still stirs in me, it had a formative influence on my life, much as it had on the conscience of my country at the time. In this speech and in the whole logic of the campaign to end legal race discrimination in America, King relied on the moral creed set forth in America's Declaration of Independence, the civic document that summarizes the foundational principles of the American way of life. I have a dream, he said, deeply rooted in the American dream, that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. The generation King addressed responded to his words from hearts that resonated deeply the famous words of America's Declaration of Independence. Hearts that understood the meaning of creation. Hearts that still acknowledged and revered the existence of God. Hearts that still submitted, albeit with all too human inconsistency, to the authority of the Creator. Just by the words and actions of those now touted as America's most acclaimed and visible elites, it's easy to see that there's no facet of this heartfelt American creed that isn't today resisted, rejected, or reviled. It's as if the people who benefited from the injustices King successfully opposed realized that our founding principle had an absolutely critical role in thwarting the scheming lust for money and power that is the driving force behind these injustices. Faced with the tidal wave of conscience King's words unleashed, they beat a tactical retreat. But they no doubt intended all along to build from the bricks and mortar of conniving, selfish passions a breakwater that would hold back and eventually turn the tide. Since I first heard King's words, I've spent many hours, days, and years researching and meditating on what King rightly referred to as America's creed. I have learned from history, but also from hard personal experience, how difficult it is truly to live out its meaning. I learned it from the long fight against slavery in the years when abolitionists stood in the glare of their burning homes and printing presses. I learned it from seeing the false compatriotism of self-righteous wrongdoing in the South and morally indifferent freedom elsewhere that eventually gave way to an unforgiving war of brother against brother on the knee-deep, bloody battlefields of the American Civil War. I learned it in the aftermath, when what was to be America's new birth of liberty proved instead to be a new frontier of unbridled greed and lust for power and pleasure. But I have especially come to understand the difficulty of living out America's creed in these years of her apostasy from the fundamental tenet without which it comes to naught. The progress of that apostasy was already well underway when Martin Luther King evoked the famous principle that linked human equality with the authority of the Creator. Eventually, the apostasy would uproot that principle from America's heart. Without its roots of principle to cling to, the rich soil of America's good conscience has been eroded by streams of licentious passion, and gradually it has been washed away. Thus bereft of roots and ground, the American creed stands today like a once flourishing evergreen left too long without water and nourishment. It is dry, brittle, and dying. The hot breath of the vanguard of history bears down now upon it, threatening to ignite what's left so that it burns away. Martin Luther King knew that without its principle of justice, America must cease to be America. Like the righteous man in the psalm, the American nation is a tree that can flourish only where justice rolls down like waters, and righteousness like a mighty stream. But what is justice when the authority of God's creation has been banished from our courts and laws, our schools, our public heart? What is righteousness when right is used to sanction palpable wrongs like those that slay our offspring in the womb? What is law when law purports to compel medical workers of good conscience to join in those murderous wrongs, enslaving them to evil, all against their will, just as other Americans were once compelled against their consciences to return fugitive slaves to those unjustly claiming to be their masters? So again now, we must seek in our dreams the day when this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. But when Martin Luther King roused the nation with his dream, America's faith in God was more than a dream. It was in truth her life-giving covenant. What is it now? Where are those who will stand against the polluted tide of history, and from the wellspring of faith draw down the righteous waters that will make America's creed a living reality again?